The neon-soaked air of Pol Astara's bustling megacity hung heavy in the dingy bar where Jim Nevin slouched over his fifth drink of the night. His blue skin, a hallmark of the Twixel race, glistened with sweat under the flickering lights. Muscles rippled beneath his shirt as he gesticulated wildly, regaling anyone within earshot about his exploits in the war against the humans. "You should have seen him run," Jim Nevin bellowed, slamming his fist on the grimy bar top. The impact sent ripples through the glasses nearby, drawing annoyed glances from other patrons. But Jim Nevin paid them no mind. He was lost in his own world of glorified memories and distorted truths. "We Twixels," he continued, puffing out his chest, "we're the greatest warriors this galaxy's ever seen. Born for combat, bred for victory." He paused to take another swig of his drink, grimacing as the cheap liquor burned its way down his throat. A few curious aliens had begun to gather around, drawn by the spectacle of the drunken Twixel veteran. Some nodded in agreement, having heard tales of Twixel prowess in battle. Others listened with skeptical expressions, but none dared to challenge Jim Nevin's assertions. "Those humans thought they could take us on," Jim Nevin sneered, his words slightly slurred. "But my squad, we were unbeatable. While other Twixels fell, we stood strong. We fought with honor, face to face, strength against strength. That's the Twixel way." As his voice rose, more heads turned in his direction. The bar's ambient chatter dimmed, replaced by the sound of Jim Nevin's boastful narrative. He reveled in the attention, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Let me tell you about the time we faced off against a whole platoon of humans," Jim Nevin began, leaning in conspiratorially. The small crowd around him leaned in too, eager to hear more about the infamous war that had ended just a few years prior. Jim Nevin's eyes gleamed with a mix of alcohol-induced haze and misplaced pride as he launched into his next tale. The crowd around him had grown, a motley assortment of alien species, all captivated by the Twixels, animated by the Twixels' animated storytelling. "Now, listen closely," Jim Nevin said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "I'm going to tell you the truth about how those humans really fought. Cowards, the lot of em." He took another swig of his drink before continuing. "My squad, we were unstoppable. But those humans? They didn't have the guts to face us head-on like real warriors." A murmur rippled through the audience. Humans were feared across the galaxy, but here was a Twixel claiming they were cowards. It was too intriguing to ignore. "You see," Jim Nevin leaned in, gesturing wildly. "They'd set up these ambushes, hiding in the shadows like vermin. We'd be marching proudly into battle, and suddenly, bam, they'd attack from all sides. No honor in that, I tell ya." He slammed his fist on the bar for emphasis, making nearby glasses rattle. "And don't get me started on their traps. Booby-trapping entire fields, rigging buildings to collapse. Where's the skill in that, huh? Where's the bravery?" The crowd listened, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging skeptical glances. But none dared to interrupt Jim Nevin's impassioned rant. But the worst, Jim Nevin's voice dropped to a growl, were those snipers. Cowards with scopes, picking off our brave warriors from kilometers away. Never even saw their faces. Is that how real soldiers fight? No. He stood up suddenly, swaying slightly. "I saw it all, my friends. Saw good Twixels fall to these dirty tactics. But not my squad. No, sir. We were too smart for their tricks. We fought with honor, with courage." As Jim Nevin paused to catch his breath, the bar had fallen almost completely silent. All eyes were on the boastful Twixel, his blue skin flushed dark with emotion and alcohol. "Humans call it strategy," he spat. "I call it cowardice. Real warriors face each other on the battlefield, not hide behind their fancy tech and sneaky tactics." Little did Jim Nevin know that his words were about to be challenged in a way he never expected. In the corner of the bar, a figure shifted in the shadows, listening intently to every word of Jim Nevin's drunken tirade. As Jim Nevin's boisterous voice filled the bar, a sudden hush fell over the crowd. The abrupt silence was so stark that even the drunken Twixel noticed, his words trailing off mid-sentence. Confused, he followed the gaze of his audience to a darkened corner of the bar. A figure rose from the shadows, the movement smooth and deliberate. As the dim light caught the stranger's features, a collective gasp rippled through the gathering. Human. The word whispered through the crowd like a chill wind. Humans were a rare sight on Pol Astara, especially this far from Earth-controlled space. The patrons shifted uneasily, many backing away instinctively. Despite Jim Nevin's claims of human cowardice, the fear in the room was palpable. The stories of human ferocity in battle were legendary, and few wanted to risk drawing their attention. The human moved towards the bar with a casual grace that belied the tension in the air. Every eye tracked their progress, including Jim Nevin's, who had gone uncharacteristically quiet. The human's face was impassive, betraying no emotion as they approached the bartender. "I'll close out my tab," the human said, voice carrying easily in the silent bar. The words were accented but clear, a reminder of just how far from home this human had traveled. As the bartender hurriedly processed the payment, the human turned slowly, surveying the room. Their gaze settled on Jim Nevin, who found himself fighting the urge to step back. The Twixel's earlier bravado seemed to have evaporated in the face of this unexpected confrontation. For a long moment, human and Twixel locked eyes. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Then, unexpectedly, the human's lips quirked into a mocking smile. "We ain't no cowards," the human said, voice laden with amusement. "What you got there is a skills gap." The words hung in the air, their impact rippling through the crowd. A few aliens who understood the nuance of the insult gasped audibly. Others looked confused, glancing between the human and Jim Nevin, sensing the shift in the atmosphere but not quite grasping why. Jim Nevin blinked, his alcohol-addled brain struggling to process the human's words. The insult, when it finally registered, hit him like a physical blow. His blue skin darkened with a rush of anger, hands clenching into fists at his sides. The human, seemingly oblivious to the effect of their words, turned back to collect their change from the bartender. But every alien in the room could see the storm brewing in Jim Nevin's eyes. The night, it seemed, was far from over. The silence in the bar stretched taut as a bowstring, all eyes darting between Jim Nevin and the human. Jim Nevin's face contorted, the insult finally sinking through his alcohol-hazed mind. His muscles tensed, blue skin darkening further with rage. You dare?" Jim Nevin sputtered, his voice a low growl. The earlier bravado returned in a rush, fueled by wounded pride and liquid courage. "I'll show you skills, human." Without warning, Jim Nevin lunged forward, his massive fist aimed squarely at the human's face. The crowd gasped, some ducking away, others leaning in to watch. But the punch never landed. With a fluid motion that seemed almost lazy, the human sidestepped. Jim Nevin's momentum carried him forward, nearly sending him sprawling. He caught himself on a nearby table, knocking over glasses that shattered on the floor. "Come on, big guy," the human taunted, a smirk playing on their lips. "That the best you got?" Jim Nevin roared, spinning around to face his opponent. He charged again, this time aiming a flurry of punches at the human. But each blow was deflected or dodged with an ease that made it look like child's play. The human's counterattack came swift and precise, a quick jab to Jim Nevin's solar plexus that left the Twixel gasping. It wasn't a devastating blow, just enough to sting and further enrage the already furious alien. "Fight back properly," Jim Nevin wheezed, his face a mask of frustration and growing confusion. "Stop dancing around like a coward." The human's laughter rang out, clear and mocking. "Why? This is fun. Besides, I thought you Twixels were supposed to be the galaxy's greatest warriors. Surely you can handle a little. What did you call it? Cowardly fighting." Jim Nevin's response was another wild swing, which the human ducked under with ease. The fight, if it could be called that, continued in this vein, Jim Nevin attacking with all his might, the human deflecting and countering with just enough force to keep the Twixel off balance. The gathered aliens watched in a mix of awe and disbelief. This wasn't the glorious combat Jim Nevin had been boasting about earlier. Instead, they were witnessing a display of skill and control that made the Twixel's earlier claims seem hollow. As the one-sided fight dragged on, Jim Nevin's movements became more desperate, his attacks more reckless. The human, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying themselves, punctuating each dodge with a laugh or a teasing comment. Sweat dripped from Jim Nevin's brow, his chest heaving with exertion and frustration. The human, barely winded, continued to dance around him, that infuriating smirk never leaving their face. Jim Nevin's earlier boasts echoed mockingly in his mind, fueling his rage. His wild eyes darted around the bar, searching for something, anything to turn the tide. That's when he saw a glint of metal on a nearby table. A knife, left behind by a patron who had fled the chaos. Without hesitation, Jim Nevin lunged for the weapon. The crowd gasped, some crying out in alarm. But the human's reaction was unexpected. Finally, the human exclaimed, eyes lighting up with genuine excitement. A real fight. Jim Nevin brandished the knife, a savage grin spreading across his face. Not so cocky now, are you, human, he snarled. But to Jim Nevin's bewilderment, the human made no move to arm themselves. They simply stood there, hands loose at their sides, still wearing that infuriating grin. What's wrong? Jim Nevin taunted, circling his opponent, too scared to face a real weapon. The human's laugh rang out, clear and fearless. Nah, just evening the odds a bit. You seem to need the help. With a roar of outrage, Jim Nevin charged, knife slashing through the air. The human's movements became a blur. One moment they were in front of Jim Nevin, the next, they were behind him. Jim Nevin spun, slashing wildly, but the human was always just out of reach. Stand still and fight, Jim Nevin bellowed, frustration evident in every line of his body. Why, the human quipped, easily avoiding another wild swing. Your knife needs the exercise. The fight continued, but it was clear to everyone watching that it was no contest. The human moved with a grace and precision that made Jim Nevin's attacks look clumsy and amateurish. Each failed attempt only served to further enrage the Twixel, making his movements more erratic and predictable. Suddenly, in a move too fast for Jim Nevin to follow, the human closed the distance between them. There was a brief scuffle, a cry of pain from Jim Nevin, and then silence. When the dust settled, the bar patrons gaped at the scene before them. Jim Nevin was pinned face down on a table, his arm twisted behind his back. The human stood over him, holding the knife that had been in Jim Nevin's hand moments ago. With deliberate slowness, the human raised the knife. Jim Nevin squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the killing blow. But it never came. Instead, there was a solid thunk as the blade embedded itself in the table, mere centimeters from Jim Nevin's face. The human leaned in close, their voice low but carrying clearly in the silent bar. See? Skills gap. The bar remained frozen in stunned silence, all eyes fixed on the scene before them. Jim Nevin, the boastful Twixel warrior, lay pinned and defeated, the human's knife quivering in the table beside his head. The human straightened up, their posture relaxed, as if they'd just finished a light workout rather than a potentially deadly fight. Learn to fight, the human said, loud enough for everyone to hear, and you might not run your mouth so much. With those parting words, the human turned and began to walk towards the exit. The crowd parted like water, no one daring to stand in their way. The human's footsteps echoed in the silent bar, punctuating the shock that permeated the room. As the human reached the door, they paused and looked back over their shoulder. Oh, and Jim Nevin, the Twixel, still sprawled on the table, managed to lift his head. Those cowardly tactics you mentioned, that's called strategy. Might want to look into it sometime. With a final, mocking salute, the human disappeared into the neon-lit streets of Polistara, leaving behind a bar full of dumbfounded aliens and one thoroughly humbled Twixel. Slowly, life began to return to the bar. Murmurs of disbelief and awe rippled through the crowd. Jim Nevin, his face a mask of shame and defeat, gingerly pushed himself up from the table. The knife that had nearly taken his eye out now served as a stark reminder of his hubris. As Jim Nevin slumped back onto his bar stool, nursing both his bruised body and ego, he couldn't help but replay the human's words in his mind. A skills gap, strategy, the concepts felt foreign, challenging everything he thought he knew about warfare and honor. The other patrons kept their distance, but their whispers reached Jim Nevin's ears. Gone was the admiration and interest from earlier. Now their words were tinged with a newfound respect not for Jim Nevin, but for the humans he had so casually dismissed as cowards. Jim Nevin, once proud Twixel warrior, sat alone in the aftermath of his humiliation. As the reality of what had transpired sank in, he was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth: perhaps the humans weren't cowards after all. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were simply better warriors than he could have ever imagined. As the night wore on, and the bar slowly returned to normal, one thing became clear to everyone present: the legend of human prowess had grown exponentially. And somewhere out in the vast expanse of Polistara, a single human walked the streets, leaving behind a wake of awe, fear, and grudging respect. The tale of the human who bested Jim Nevin would be told and retold, growing with each iteration. And with it, the reputation of humans as formidable adversaries would spread further across the galaxy, ensuring that no one would make the mistake of underestimating them again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you loved it. Please remember to subscribe if you did like it so you can see more videos like this. And please give us a like and a comment too. I'll see you in the next one.